Hi everyone and welcome to today's video. This is a B1 level grammar lesson. We're continuing our discussion about linking words. Today we're going to be talking about using linking words to express clarification and intensity. So there are different ways to clarify things in English using transitions or linking adverbs. But first, to clarify means to make clear or easy to understand. So you could say, in other words, to put it another way, to put it differently, to rephrase it, to explain. In other words is used when you want to explain something more simply and directly. Thomas told me he's not feeling well. In other words, I don't think he'll be at work today. John didn't hand in his report. In other words, he's still as lazy as always. In other words is idiomatic and more common in spoken English than in written forms. Other expressions have a similar meaning, including specifically, strictly speaking, that is, and in plain English. So now, match the beginning of the sentence to the end. You can pause the video, try this on your own, and then restart when you're ready to check your answers. I don't have enough money for dinner. In other words, I need to get paid soon. I can't concentrate with the music on. In other words, do you mind turning the radio off? I am easily tired. In other words, I'm going to skip gym today. And I'm in terrible traffic. In other words, I am going to be late. So now add a second sentence to clarify the first. Use in other words, specifically, strictly speaking, that is, or in plain English. And here's an example. I lost my glasses. In other words, I couldn't finish the article you asked me to read. Now these are kind of your own ideas, so feel free to share these in the comments and I will be glad to give you some feedback, or you can give feedback to the other students who list comments. Now we can use various expressions to restate in a different way something that has already been said. John isn't looking well. To put it another way, he really needs to start looking after his health. The government says there will be some changes in the new budget. To put it differently, prepare yourself for more taxes. Georgia was clear when she explained that you didn't have permission to do that. To rephrase it, she said no. And the novel is extremely challenging. To explain, I'd suggest reading something else. Words can intensify or make stronger the meaning or emotional content of a sentence. That is very interesting. That is very, very interesting. That is incredibly interesting, or that is fascinating. With each sentence, the intensity of the emotion increases. So we're going to look at these transition words and adverbs used for intensifying. In fact, of course, certainly, and surely. Surely is often used when the speaker is trying to reassure themselves or another person. Smile, surely things could be worse. Usually, surely is used when the speaker believes something despite some reasons not to. Now match the sentences. It's not typical for him to be so late. Surely there is a good reason. He's a good guy. Surely he'll apologize. And she works hard and does her job well. Surely she'll be promoted. We use of course to refer to things that are obvious or already known to the speaker and listener or to everyone. Of course will arrive on time at the restaurant. We use of course if the information is not surprising. Of course we all knew that she would pass her driving exam. Can I borrow $100? Of course you can. Of course is an intensified version of yes as an answer when someone asks for permission. Of course not is the negative form. Certainly is more commonly used when something is a fact. Her husband cooked her a nice dinner. Certainly she's been under a lot of stress. In fact is used to emphasize the truth, especially if it's contrary to what is expected. She coaches a football team. In fact, she's at practice right now. Actually can also be used this way. He hasn't done his homework again. Actually, you really need to speak to him about it. Again, match the first half to the second half to make sentences. Again, you can pause the video, try this on your own, and then restart when you're ready to check your answers. He's really tall. In fact, he often bangs his head on the door frame. He travels a lot for work. In fact, he's in Hong Kong right now. He's really intelligent. In fact, he graduated from university a year early, and he lives nearby. In fact, I can walk to his house. As a matter of fact is used in the same way as in fact. I was so bored in history class. As a matter of fact, I fell asleep in the middle of the lecture. Again, you can complete the sentences with your own words and feel free to share your sentences in the comments. Anyway, anyhow, in any case are used to add support to the previous statement and often a lack of concern. I wasn't invited to the party. In any case, I didn't want to go. He hasn't spoken to me in weeks. Anyway, I didn't really like him. I won't finish this report today. Anyhow, it isn't needed until the end of the week. Be careful. Anyways is very informal and it is considered incorrect by many speakers. We didn't get to see the film. Anyways, I doubt it was very interesting. Again, you can practice by filling in completing the sentences with your own words. And if you would like, please share your answers in the comments. Now respond to each piece of information using transition words and adverbs and your own ideas. And again, feel free to share these in the comments and I'll offer some feedback and hopefully generate some conversation. And that brings us to the end of today's video. Please like, subscribe, share, leave comments, participate in the discussion, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.